Hello, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to my office. It's time for another episode. Finally, sorry there was a little bit of a break in there. I found out that I didn't get accepted to any of the PhD programs that I applied to, and I needed a little bit of time to regroup and eat some extra ice cream and work out extra hard in the gym just to get out some feelings. You know, things don't always go the way that we want them to, and they don't always happen in the timing that we want them to. So we just have to roll with the punches and hope the universe knows what it's doing in the timeline that it needs things done. So I need a little bit of time to regroup and reformulate and sit down and figure out a new plan. I believe in my topic and I believe in my research, and there's just sometimes a disconnect between the people who agree to be your advisors should you be accepted to the program and the admissions board. So I'm going to spend some time reworking my proposal, not reworking, completely rewriting, starting it from the ground up. You just got to do that sometimes. And hopefully this time around, admissions boards will understand what I'm trying to say, and I'll find better ways to communicate my ideas. So that's just how things go in academia, and we keep moving forward. That's the important part. Today we have a really incredible conversation. I honestly, this conversation was one that I was very much looking forward to because my guest is just so incredible and has done a lot of really good work. And so I knew that this was going to be a fun conversation to have. We talk about disabilities and how they're treated in the United States. We discuss how people learn to work with people with disabilities and how the systems around special education are set up. And we also talk about how those systems can be challenged and how challenging those systems and the biases that set them up can ultimately affect everyone for the better. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode because I very much enjoyed this conversation. My guest today is Dr. Richard A. Price, who is a white cisgendered gay scholar with over a decade of experience supporting the transition from school to work for individuals with disabilities. Currently, he is an assistant professor of special education at Purdue University. He holds a master's degree in rehabilitation vocational counseling, kinesiology adaptive sport, and applied behavior analysis autism from Michigan State University, and a PhD in special education from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Price is passionate about understanding the diverse identities and experiences of individuals with disabilities, a commitment shaped by growing up with a sibling with a disability and witnessing the systemic shortcomings in including and integrating people with disabilities in education and society. Dr. Price's research centers on the transition from school to work for individuals with disabilities, more specifically examining the services and supports provided to students in enhancing their career development. Additionally, Dr. Price is interested in adaptive sports, ethics and practice, and applied behavior analysis, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaboration, the intersection of disability and LGBTQ plus identities, and sexual and relationship education. Everyone, please help me welcome Dr. Richard A. Price.
I feel like every time I log into Zoom, something new is
They're
changed, and
always
I can't.
changing it. They're always changing it. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Zoom from 2019 would not understand what Zoom from 2026 is.
No, no. And you think like there have been times where I teach class and I'm like, oh, I'll log in 5 minutes before class. And it's like, okay, we're going to restart your whole system, add all these new features. And I'm like, Awesome. Great. A heads up would have been fine.
And like recently it's tried to do the do you want to turn on the AI things for taking notes? No, I do not. I'm good. Thank you. Stop asking.
I don't know if it shows it on your end, but the countdown for it doing it, and it'll automatically start the AI system if I'm not fast enough to
Hmm.
hit X. And I'm like, I feel like that shouldn't be the default.
I feel like AI should not be the default in general for a lot of
No, I would
things.
agree with that. Yes, yes.
Like Google, let me just make my own conclusions. I don't need you to conclude things for me. Thank you.
Yep, yep, exactly. Yes.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I love your glasses, by the way. I need to
Thank you.
expand my glasses collection.
Zlol, if you're familiar with the company, Zeelol, super cheap, which is great. And they're the one company that I found that I can put in my prescription on my own versus like it needs to come from the doctor because I haven't gone to the eye doctor in a
Mhm.
few years. And I'm like, I don't need to like re-change my prescription every 2 years.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah, the
I
the
just bought a
two
new
pairs
pair.
that I have, the two pairs that I have I got from Glam, which is basically the same
Hmm.
thing. It's probably the same company by a different name
Right,
online.
right.
But yeah, I it's one of those like Facebook companies that you're like, there's no way this is real, but I'm gonna try it anyway. And then you get them and you're like, wait a second, these work.
Right. I was like,
Let's
this is
see.
for $7, but then I'm like, actually, the quality is pretty great, so I won't hate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to start out the podcast by asking, could you talk a little bit about your academic journey and how you got to where you are, why you got to where you are, all of the fun nitty-gritty kind of things?
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I feel like it's been a series of just like falling into kind of where I'm at, but then also like some intention with it as well. So I have a brother who has a disability who's younger than me. So like very early on, I w was like volunteering in like various disability organizations. I would volunteer to like assist the special education teachers in our middle school. I would get connected to like summer camps where I would be learning a lot. And so I think from a very young age, I was really witness to like, the family kind of perspective of education for those with disabilities. And I was like, I think this is what I want to go into. And I remember, I can like vividly still remember like playing teacher in my room growing up with projectors that I would ask for Christmas that they don't have anymore, obviously. So, not to date myself. And so that was kind of like the path. And I was like, all right, I want to do this. But I also had it in the back of my mind of wanting to actually go into medicine, but
Mm,
specifically like either as a pediatrician or something that kind of knew the knowledge of disability, because that was kind of another thing that I was witness to with like my family is that a lot of these doctors don't know how to interact with families or they're giving information that is just not correct. Like I still talk to families to this day that like their primary care or whatever is like, hey, your son or daughter has Down syndrome and they're never going to have a job. They're not going to walk, talk. And I'm like, that is just completely false. And so I was like, we just need to get some more, competent people or just like knowledge about disability. So
mm,
went to college, was originally going into special education, and then I pivoted from that because I realized I didn't want to be in the classroom at the time. So I went pre-med. I never went to med school, as I'm sure you can kind of find that out. So I kind of fell into like, all right, I had like finished my undergrad, like what am I going to do with life? And so there was this master's program that was recruiting. And I was like, all right, let's just try this. Like, might as well. And so that was in rehab counseling. So very similar to like social work.
mm,
But it really kind of opened my eyes a little bit more to like the counseling side of things for individuals with disabilities, and specifically supporting them in their career development. So fell into that, had some really great experiences, and then also then fell into the applied behavior analysis field, which all of this is like very similar and integrated. And so after kind of going through all my years of schooling and all the very much debt that I have, I worked as a clinician for a while for little kids with autism. And so I did that for a while. It was really fun, kind of helped out in the company. And then I was just realizing that like I really want to make changes for people with disabilities, like policy wise. Like if we're gonna change the system, like we have to start top down. And the more people I talked to when I would get involved with like some of that stuff was like, well, they only list like these politicians or like other people, they only listen to you if you have the doctor in front of your name or the PhD after or whatever. I was like, I guess
Hmm.
I'm going back to school. And so went to the University of Illinois to get a PhD in special education, where I focused my research on the transition out of high school for individuals with disabilities. So mainly getting some sort of employment, career development, but also like independent living, self-identity, all of that stuff. And then that's how I kind of fell into this job. Well, I didn't fall. I did apply to many positions. The job market is awful. Never again. But now I'm at Purdue and I teach in our special education department, and I absolutely love it. No complaints.
Well, first off, give all my love to the Purdue Owl people and all of the help that they do for those of
Mhm.
us trying to write citations.
Yep. I feel like in a way, like work, I felt like this last year when I first started this position. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I can't not do everything perfect because I'm here now. So, but
but
it is very, very helpful for sure.
so in reading the articles that you sent over, and I have a little bit of history of working with people with disabilities, and my mom was a teacher's aide in the Seattle
Cool.
Public School District working in special education. Me and my sister used to joke that that's why she was so good at homeschooling us, which
Mhm.
is kind of the point that I want to make, in that I feel like the way we treat special education students in schools and the way we treat students with disabilities in schools is the same attitude that we treat all students with. and
Mm,
then and then
mm,
we're surprised when people are like, I don't know how to exist, I don't know how to do things, I don't know how to be part of society.
mm,
It's just a it's like a those programs are kind of a divining rod for how students are treated in general. It's just
mhm,
a lot more pronounced because those students need extra help just to get to that baseline
mhm,
that everyone else is expected to be at for some
mhm.
reason.
Right, right.
So I guess this is all kind of leading to the question of so how how do those programs work? Like, how
Mm,
do they how do they decide who goes into those programs?
mm,
And
mhm,
then the curriculum for those programs, and
mm,
why isn't that curriculum also integrated in with the other students who
mm, mm.
probably could benefit from it?
Wow, you have like 7 hours for me to go on that rabbit hole. No, that's a really, really great question. I think the first thing that I want to that just popped into my head when you were asking that is I recently just was at this like conference and we were all talking about like the future of research to support people with disabilities and what have you. And I mean, the sentiment is, I think, across different groups of people and like fields or whatever, but it's, hey, we should value all students and like we should support all students, including those with disabilities and those not. And I sat with that for a while and it was like, it almost gives like all lives matter, to be honest, where I'm
It
like,
sounds like it, yeah.
right, exactly. Like, yes, but also like we do need to individualize like treatments and things have to be different for certain people because if not then yeah they're just going to fall through the cracks if we're going to treat everybody the same. And so I just find that very interesting because especially in this field of special education with like research and stuff I constantly have these conversations and I'm like why are we afraid to say disability or why are we afraid to say like no it is different but that's fine. So I don't know
Mm.
that it's been something I've been sitting with for a while. um, but to answer your question, okay, so it's a lofty one. Um, so For K through 12 like education for students with disabilities, I mean there's many different kind of paths of like where they kind of fall into in the supports that they're getting. But the typical special education, I would say, falls underneath the Individuals Disabilities Education Act. And so with that, you do have to have a qualifying disability. So there are 13 disability categories, and essentially based upon like what the law says, and there's a lot more to kind of, nuance to this, but if the disability that the student has impedes educational outcomes or whatever, then they kind of fall underneath this protection, I would say, or education of IDEA. And within special education. So they, get individual education programs, a lot of individual supports, and what have you. There's also like if you because it's so restricted almost of like, oh, you have to have these 13 disability, like one of these 13, and show that it impedes your education. There's a lot of people that don't fall underneath that kind of umbrella. And so they might just get, you know, other accommodations or modifications to kind of access the general education curriculum. So that's kind of like the simple version of the nuts and bolts of like how students kind of fall. But I think we do have it, how do I want to say this? Is I think you're right in that really special education shouldn't be treated as this like separate thing that's only for these people. Because if we're being realistic, like everybody could benefit from these accommodations and these supports. And so like I think there is still such a message of like, oh, hey, these are your kids, these are the special ed kids, instead of like, oh, but it's all of our jobs. And really, at the end of the day, it is the general educators that should be providing those supports to students. But I think again, top down, especially being in a university program right now, like those teachers who are going into teaching general education, they're not taught how to support people with disabilities or how to
Mm.
accommodate or what have you. So then we're getting into a situation where they're like, oh, well, that's not my problem. Those aren't my kids. That's your job. And then we just have like a kind of a bad trickle down effect. And so I think it really all comes back down to, I think, a training kind of standpoint, because I have this conversation with my students a lot of, all right, if I'm going to give you all the option of like reading this article or listening to this podcast, but like it's the same content, I'm just like modifying it for you based upon your needs. Why wouldn't I give that to everyone? Because it's going to benefit everybody. And I do see some like lights click, and you're like, oh, wait, yeah, that is right. Or like, if I'm going to give this one student an extra hour on their test because they need it individually, that's great. But like, could I give that to everybody? Like, why is that not allowed to do? So I don't know. I think there's a lot of changing that we have to kind of see in how we train teachers, but I think I went off on a little bit of a tangent on that one.
No, 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 not at all. That completely makes sense. I also wonder if it has something to do with how, at least in the United States, how we look at education in general, in terms of it being very authoritarian and take my word for it and don't ask questions, just memorize and regurgitate. And then
Mm-hmm.
those students who don't think in that way and who can't
Mm-hmm.
do um that kind of work are othered because they
Mm-hmm.
can't fall into that regime as it is. I
Yep.
mean, getting a little Foucaultian there in terms of thinking of school as a prison, but I mean that's kind of the setup in terms of you sit, you learn, you leave, and if you
Mm-hmm.
can't deal with that situation, then
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of put in this other place of like, oh, well, you're a special kid and you have to,
Mm-hmm.
versus
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, everyone learns in different ways. Let's find ways to make sure that everyone gets this information,
Right.
because that leads to people asking questions. And when you start to
Mhm.
question too much, then you start realizing that you get to question things.
Yes. Yep. Yep. No, I think you're so right. Like we have such a culture of like this like rote responding and memorization instead of like actually teaching critical thinking or like problem solving or things like that. And I And I think that's outside of a K through 12 kind of system too, like even in university programs. And lately I've been trying to have this conversation with my students and like myself of, we need to kind of dismantle this traditional way of educating that like I hold all the knowledge, I'm going to teach you all, I know everything, and then you just kind of go on. I'm like, what? I don't know everything, first of all. Also, learning doesn't happen in a vacuum, so it's not going to happen inside of this classroom. Um, and yeah, yeah. The state of
I
education
mean,
in this country is,
if
I don't know.
if Socrates didn't think that's how it worked, I think we can probably say that it doesn't work that way.
Right, right.
but
Yes.
but yeah, I mean, something that struck me in the articles that you sent over was the concept of being able to live independently.
Mm, hmm
um what does that mean, both
mm,
for the student but then also for the caregivers
mm,
who are living with those students? What sorts of things are they trying to teach students with disabilities in terms of getting to a point where they can live independently? But then
mm.
on top of that, and this may be a really stupid question,
No, no stupid questions.
but why is living independently the goal that we're aiming towards?
Mm, that's a great question, actually. Um, another, gosh, you're really throwing some tough ones out there. It should be like weeks and weeks of conversations. Um, So yeah, so I feel like, and that definitely the stages of education for people with disabilities has changed drastically throughout the last 40, 50 years, which really is not that far ago. Sometimes I feel very dated when I like stand in front of my students and I was like, hey, this law went into effect in 2004 or whatever. And I'm like, when were you all born again? Oh, okay. So you weren't alive during that. Great, cool. Anyway, but the kind of like how we've seen people with disabilities and throughout kind of the US was at first like, oh, hey, we have to put them in institutions, like they're not able to learn or be educated. And then that definitely shifted with a lot of self-advocate advocacy, parent advocacy of no, like everybody can learn. We just have to have these individual supports and what have you. And so there was like an emphasis on academics, and then that kind of shifted to a huge focus on like, well, we should be preparing students to leave high school and to be able to live fulfilling lives because, school is only a short period of your life. And so then there was a huge focus on functional living skills, independent living skills, whatever that might mean to an individual, because, yeah, it looks very different, disability or not, to be honest. Like, are you living by yourself? Are you living with roommates? Are you living with your family? Especially now, like who can afford to live on their own and like do these things. Um, and then it's kind of like now we're kind of going back to like, oh, well, no, academics are also important. Like we should push that too. And so, I think there's a trying to a little bit of an equal weight. But it's really, I would say, dependent on that person and kind of what their educational program is. And so, I think realistically, there are maybe students that like, with support from their family and then, those educational professionals that are like, all right, let's really focus on these functional independence skills of like, all right, maybe this individual is probably always going to live at home or with a sibling, but like, are they able to feed themselves? Are they able to, take care of their own hygiene? Are they able to, feel like they have a purpose when they wake up, whether it be a job or volunteering or just like kind of going into the community? And so I think it looks very different per individual, but your question of like why is that the end goal, like independent living, I think is really interesting because now I'm just thinking out loud at this point. But I think it's almost used to a detriment, I would say, is I think a lot of times we're like, oh, okay, we're gonna just teach you how to shower, how to make your own food, and like the very basic like independent living skills, and then these individuals graduate and they're actually not prepared to live independently, whatever that might mean. Because I think there's a lot more that goes into it. It's like, how are we supporting the families to see what that looks like specifically? Um, all of that. And what I find, because again, my population of students that I do a lot of my research and work as is in that high school age range is federally. by the age of 16, if a student has a disability that's qualifying under the law, they have to be kind of supported to graduate high school, whatever that might mean to them. But that only has to begin when they turn 16. Some states say, hey, at 14, we should start teaching these skills. But I think we wait too late and then we only focus on those kind of like basic skills. And then these students graduate and they're actually not able to live independently or advocate on their own because we haven't really adequately like supported them that way. Um, so it's a tricky question because I think it's very I don't know. I've been thinking a lot of this personally as well because I'm like, why did I go into this profession? Or like, why do I do the things in life that we do? And I think like we have a society and a culture that's set up like, oh, okay, you're supposed to go to college, then you're supposed to get like a 9 to 5 job, then you find a partner, then you get married, and then you have kids. And like we kind of have these fake expectations that are fake. And so I think we have the same for individuals with disabilities too, and then we're not supporting them the way that they need to kind of break out of that mold. I don't know if that makes sense where I kind of went.
It does. Well, and I think this isn't me trying to sit here and be like, oh well, all students are need like I'm not trying to do that
Oh
sort of a
yeah.
thing. What I'm trying to understand, I guess, as a sociologist, I'm always questioning norms, societal norms, and
Mhm.
why norms are what they are. And I'm really curious as to, like, okay, so considering I took ASL when I was in college for a year as one of my language requirements. And something that we talked about a lot in that class was not just the language, but also the culture and what it meant to be deaf in today's society.
Mhm.
And as part of that, discussing cochlear implants and hearing aids and things like that, and whether or not only are they worth it for the person, but
Mhm.
also what does that mean culturally for the person.
Mhm.
um, and so I guess where this line of questioning is coming from is this desire to understand if people with disabilities, if every single person is required to come to the same conclusion at the end of their schooling, or if we all have to follow this prescribed way of life, or if perhaps we can question that and say, okay, what does life look like when you aren't part of the majority? Is
Mhm.
it, are you required to take part in larger society and larger culture? If someone doesn't want to, or is perhaps more comfortable around people with similar disabilities or similar circumstances, is that something that we can train them and help them achieve, rather
Mhm.
than forcing them to achieve a specific
Mhm.
societal norm?
Mhm.
Does that make any sense?
Yes. Yeah, no, it totally doesn't. I think I see that a lot of just like we have I think our teachers, but then again, I think that starts top down with like how we're educating these future teachers is kind of this prescribed way of like education and things that have to be done and what life outside of that looks like. But you bring up an interesting point that like yeah like each disability is different. There's a lot of cultural facts that kind of go into that. You know, identity formation and kind of nurturing that and why I think that's kind of where we have this like barrier that like we are trying to like get people to be like, oh well, this is the prescribed thing, we're gonna get them a 9 to 5 job, like they have to live on their own, like do all these things. Or like how we speak about disability and kind of you know all students matter kind of,
Yeah.
I'm really on that kick lately. Um, but
I
the
guess it
the
comes down to like how we define success as a
yes,
society.
yes, yes. And I would argue that, and I try to do this a lot in my work and even in my classes now, is so I don't identify as having a disability. And so like I always try to enter a space acknowledging that because I do feel like sometimes when I'm teaching these future teachers or like working with families or what have you that like I'm doing this work for, not like with.
Mm,
And I've started to kind of incorporate like having advisory boards for my work or, co-teaching my classes with someone who identifies as having a disability because they're the ones that are able to share their lived experience, but also be like, hey, this is you know, what do I want to say? This is what the future should look like. Like, why
mm,
are these non-disabled people dictating what success looks like?
mm,
And it's just, yeah, that's a very interesting point, and I feel like there's a lot of almost like tugging of that because there's a lot of people I think in this field that kind of go into it to like support students and feel like they're doing like a savior complex almost without
mm.
like really kind of and maybe acknowledging that. But there's definitely a lot of oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, well, like whenever I tell people that like I'm in this field or like are my future teachers too, they're like, "Oh my God, you're doing such great work! Like, you must have so much patience and all that stuff." And like it's just like icky and gross because I
Hmm.
think that it belittles like this whole population of students that we're supporting.
Yeah.
But again, it's these non-disabled people that are kind of setting the tone and setting what that success looks like. Um, yeah, that's an interesting. I'm kind of putting two to two together. Kind of, you're asking some really stumping questions, which is
That's my
good though.
job.
Which is good. Which I don't think like I'm even trying to think like within my department right now in my program area. Well, really, out in most university settings, I feel like that I've walked into, it is majority non-disabled people. Maybe family
Mm,
members or siblings, and that's a whole other perspective. But then I'm like, okay, all this work that we're doing, like, does this actually matter to the people that we're like doing it
mm.
for? And if not, then why are we doing it?
Well, I mean, I think that that comes to the question of like, does representation matter kind of a thing. It's
Hmm.
that same level of thought, that same plane of thought. And I mean, I'm always all for representation, as much representation of as much as many types of people as possible. And I
Hmm.
don't think it's necessarily because everyone should attain to be everything, but everyone needs to know that they have the possibility to do whatever. And I'm thinking about like actors with Down syndrome that
Hmm.
like Glee did such a huge thing for actors
Hmm.
with Down syndrome because people before Glee, there was no character anywhere on TV that had Down syndrome. And then Becky comes along and is not just a sidekick, but over the series becomes a recurring major character who has a fully rounded personality,
Hmm.
and we
Hmm.
really got to see her grow as a person. We got to see her struggles, we got to see her triumphs and all of those kinds of things. And that was kind of a breakthrough moment, I think, for a lot of people who didn't have access to people in their own lives who have Down syndrome. um
Hmm.
but her success was not the same as like Leah Michelle's success, or it wasn't the same as she was doing the same work just in a different way and a different format. um and so that's where this line of questioning is coming from for me, is not saying, well, oh, why don't we just leave them behind? That's not what I'm saying. I'm
Oh
saying,
yeah, yeah.
what why do we I guess this is just a rhetorical question at this point, but why do we expect
Hmm.
everyone to achieve the same level of success when that's not possible? Like, I
Right.
don't ever see myself achieving the level of CEO because I was not born into those circumstances. Like, I
Right.
could work my ass off, but I also am not the type of person that I'm going to step on people's toes and crack people's backs to get to that position because
Hmm.
of my upbringing. I wasn't kind I haven't gotten to that point in my mindset where I could do that to another person.
Hmm.
So I guess redefining that success and redefining what does it mean to be independent and what does it mean to live your
Mm.
life, depending on your circumstances and what you want out of life.
Yeah, I mean, I think you like what I keep hearing, like you saying too, is like what you want from life, what you're defining
Mm-hmm.
as success. And I think that's the key point, is we're not, I think we're not doing a good enough job at being like, hey, these students that have, disabilities, whatever, in school, like, how are we supporting you for you to define what
Mm,
success looks like in your life? Because I think too many times what happens is it's overwhelming for families and parents.
for sure.
And there's just a lot that kind of, goes into, and again, every disability is different in circumstance. But kind of thinking about like, oh, what does that future life looks like keeps getting pushed off.
Mm,
And or even like the families are advocating on behalf of the child, or teachers are advocating on behalf of the child, and then we're then expecting these individuals when they are 18 or to graduate to be like, okay, hey, here's your life, but you've never taught me how to really understand who I
yeah.
am and to advocate for myself or whatever. And you know again, we are defining almost like what that success looks like for them, and I think that is probably for a lot of people disability or not, just on how our society and culture is like set up.
Mm,
Probably even worse for, that population. Instead of being like, hey, what do you want to do? And what do you want to do with the success of your life? Like, what does that look like for you? And also then being like, I respect and I honor that. Not, well,
yeah.
actually, like, have you thought about this instead?
You should
Um,
just keep shooting for the stars though. You're not shooting high enough.
right,
Like
right,
why
right.
are you limiting yourself?
Yeah, like why do we like I find this a lot too in in kind of this field, that we want to be like student centered and person centered and be like, hey, what do you want for your life? Let's like support you. But then it's like, well, not really. Actually, I'm going to kind of guide you in the right direction. And I'm like, I think guiding and supporting is good in some circumstances, but then if you're kind of not acknowledging what they actually want and then believing
Mm,
them, that's a problem. And so I think that's a huge piece to it. But then also, I think it's in general like society's view of people with disabilities that kind of also defines that success. Is that even if someone did, want to go off and be the Leah Michelles of the world, there's just a lot of barriers that those people are going to face because there's so many people out there that have such low expectations of people with disabilities, or,
yeah.
our society is very ableist. It's just based upon those principles and, the able-bodied and what have you. And so even if you are pushing for that, there's just so many more hurdles on top of it. This actually happened, that I teach a adaptive PE course for our pre-service teachers, and we had the unique experience because the Olympics happened, this
Hmm.
semester, and so we had conversations in class about like the difference between the Olympics and the Paralympics, and how the representation like of the Paralympics is, I mean, getting better, but is so much less than
Yeah.
the Olympics,
And they're not even
and
as
they're
televised.
right. Well, exactly. I was scrolling on TikTok one a few months ago, and there was a Paralympian that was kind of talking about some of this like media representation. And they were sharing that there were some games that they just forgot to bring the camera equipment to. And then, or if they did have the camera equipment, they just forgot to like come up with the interview questions or whatever. And I'm like, how do you just forget to do that? Because if this was the Olympics, you wouldn't have forgotten. There would be no
Yeah.
chance in hell. And so it's just, I don't know. Sometimes I always feel like I'm preaching to the choir when I'm like training these future teachers, that I'm
Yeah.
like, I think you're in it for the right reason and like what, good. But I'd rather be talking to the pre-med people, the chemists, the
Mm.
whatever, that are kind of really setting the tone for how we interact with people with disabilities and what have you.
Well, and like you brought up earlier, the history of disabilities, especially in the US, the fact that just 50 years ago, 60 years ago, if someone had a disability, they were put in an asylum. They were put in some kind of hospital up on a hill somewhere where their family wasn't part of it, and the doctors were infantilizing them and just leaving them to kind of wallow because they didn't see any purpose for them in life if they couldn't do what an able-bodied white man could do.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, and I think to a certain extent we're still there.
Hmm.
And again,
Hmm.
I'm not saying that the systems that we've set up so far should be gotten rid of. I think they should be built up and they should be continued, and we should be constantly reworking them and considering them. But
Hmm.
you look at some of those programs and you can still see that infantilization going on of just like, oh, well, you have a disability, so therefore you must not even know how to do this. So let's teach you this.
Hmm.
When some of those students might already know how to do some of those things to take care of themselves and they need a different level of something. But it's,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, I think that's one reason why uh, we're seeing this kind of pushback against students and people in our generation even who are saying, hey, I have ADHD, hey, I'm autistic. It's just not the type of autistic you are thinking of.
Hmm.
And how
Hmm.
difficult it is for them to get those accommodations in school, out of school, etc. Because if it's not visible, then it must not be real.
Hmm. Hmm.
B, how dare you
Hmm.
ask for individualized attention?
Hmm.
Because everyone should be able to do all of the same things all at the same time. Like
Hmm.
there's just these expectations that have been set up from the beginning. And one of your articles even was talking about the need to go back younger and start training from a
Hmm.
younger age. And that
Hmm.
it made me think about the fact, so I was homeschooled up until college, and so all of that kind of training came from my parents. And so I always just kind of considered, oh, that should be the parents' job to do all of that kind of stuff. But then you
Hmm.
factor in people in different socioeconomic statuses who maybe both of the parents have to work, or one of the parents isn't there, or maybe they don't have parents and they're living with a grandparent who is having to work or is on social security, or there are just so many situations. So it makes sense that some of that
Hmm.
training would then come from
Hmm.
school, but schools as they stand aren't equipped to
Hmm.
help students in that way.
Yeah, and yeah, you're making me think too of some conversations I've had with students as well. It's again, I think that yeah, the system doesn't need we don't need to get rid of it. We just like have to kind of shift the way that we're thinking and like maybe this new wave of education. And I think there's a lot of people that just refuse. I don't know. Okay, maybe refuse is a bad word, but like they're not willing to like unlearn to like maybe learn
Mm,
a new way to like do things because I think there is a lot more now representation. We have a lot more voices. Like we're uplifting that a little bit more, but there still is like kind of this like hesitation. One interaction that kind of comes to mind specifically is I teach a lot in my classes, like the difference between identity first language and person first language.
mm,
And so like how we talk about people with disabilities. And gosh, over a decade ago. Yeah, what year is it? 2026. So like legislative language and the way that we talked about disabilities shifted to like, oh, we should be honoring the person first, and saying, hey, this person with Down syndrome or what have you. Like,
mm-hmm,
we're going to be more respectful. Um, but I feel like there's also a connotation there that's like, okay, the disability comes second, so we're still kind of seeing it as like less than. And so there's been a constant push, and I think even more now of like identity first, of like, oh, I am disabled or a disabled person. And that comes culturally to such kind of you were speaking to like deaf and hard of hearing individuals versus someone with an intellectual disability. They,
mm-hmm,
the way that things are described are very different. But again, all coming back to like that individual should be the ones that is setting the tone of like, this is what I want to be called. This is, and I have a lot of few like students that I work with that like we talk about identity and first and person first, and they're like, oh well, I'm going to be respectful and like always do person first, like person with a student with a disability. And I'm like, okay, but like what if they don't want to be referred to as that way. And they're like, well, like I don't know if they know that they have a disability, and like that's not my place to kind of, you know, push that and what have you. And I'm like, that's the problem right there. Is like, why are we disability is not less than. It's not, it doesn't make a person less than. And I can see where you're coming from that. Like maybe that is a family perspective that like they have to be the ones that like support their child to like understand they have a disability, but like why aren't we doing that?
Mm.
And then because of that, we're continuing this perspective that like disability is still less, or we infantilize them, or you know, see them as inspirations. And that's what we kind of have to shift away from. But I think, and again, I'm going down a tangent on this one, but I, before I forget this, but like when you were kind of, you know, I feel like history is kind of repeating itself, unfortunately, because so a lot of most of my work focuses on like career development and kind of like institutions. The sheltered workshops were like a huge thing for people with disabilities, where, hey, you know, you're gonna go work in this factory and like just you know, do little nuts and bolts or whatever. But it's a purpose, it's something to do. You're getting paid pennies for the work that you're doing, and you're in a factory by yourself, but like this is great work. And there's been a huge push for like, we need to shut that down. It's very institutionalized. Like, why can't people with disabilities work in the community like anyone else? But there are a lot of states right now that are trying to revert back to these sheltered workshops, but framing it as like, oh, well, this is good because it's a purpose. There's somewhere for them to go. And I'm like, why are we lessening the expectations that we have of people? And we're just going to kind of repeat this of, especially with education, and like if people are going to go to private and charter schools, like they could turn away someone with a disability left and right. So, like then what is happening? uh,
Well, and then
Down a rabbit hole.
it also opens the door for how you treat everyone else.
Mm,
If you're okay with putting someone who has any kind of a disability in a sheltered work space like that, you're going to
mhm,
be okay with leaving people in a developing country in horrible working conditions, working for pennies, making the clothing that you're wearing.
mhm,
And
mhm.
it blossoms from there. Like
Yep.
if you concede that one thing, it's going to lead to more and more
Right.
until everyone is failing
Well, yeah,
in
and I feel
every
like
possible way.
we're seeing that especially now in this like country where, you know, if certain groups of people are essentially being attacked, but it's like, no, that's everybody's problem, because if there's like, you know, crackdown on this like one demographic, that's going to get back to you at some point. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
not separate from that, even though you might not belong to that community. And I don't think people are
You're not immune.
realizing
Yeah.
that. Right, right, right. And it's
Yeah.
just, yeah,
You
it is
start
a,
making concessions and the concessions grow.
mhm. Right. Yeah. You open the door slightly for something and it's just gonna crumble. So I think like it's just a very interesting time, especially to be in education, because yeah, there's such like attack on public education and you know, supporting people with disabilities. And it's like what do we do? But I do think with all of this, like it's not ending anytime soon. Um, we've made such strides in this country because those with disabilities, those from minority groups have been the ones that have advocated and like raised a voice, and has been parent or groups. And I think that's going to have to come back again, or else we're going to just see a repeat of what we've seen before.
A question that I've kind of been bouncing around in my mind for a while is so a lot of the pushback against the new labels that we're using, the vocabulary that we're using to describe ourselves to people, all of that kind of stuff
Mm.
seems to be rooted in a fatigue from 90s PC culture,
Mm.
in that uh, I just saw a TikTok today asking, someone was asking, did y'all really think that the 90s weren't racist? And it's like, no,
Mm.
but because of the culture that was created, we were seeing, at least in our media, we were seeing a culture that wasn't. We were
Mm,
seeing
mm,
more different types of people on TV, and we were
mm,
being really ultra careful with how we talked about people and what words were used to describe people. And
mm,
I wonder how that is affecting relationships today and our relationship to minority groups.
mm,
Not saying that it was bad, not at
mm,
all, and not saying what we're trying to do now is bad, but just the connection between those two movements, because
mm,
it felt like in the 2000s 2010s we were kind of in this post, I don't
mm,
want to say post racial, post discrimination, but it felt like we were in like this, okay, we dealt with this in the 90s, we're good, let's move forward.
mm,
Not that we actually had, but culturally in the US that's kind of what it seemed like. um and now we're seeing it all kind of come back with a vengeance, and
mm,
so we're having to kind of remind people, remember, people are people and
mm,
representation matters. I guess I'm
mm.
wondering where, what the connective tissue is there, and why, and this may not even be a question that you can answer, but just why is empathy so hard? No, why is it,
Oh
why
gosh.
is it so but why is it that our systems are so immovable when it comes to accommodating people that need different outcomes?
Gosh, I don't know.
Why do
Um,
humans hate each
I,
other?
I honestly, I know, I really don't. Maybe it's like fear based that like, oh, if
Mm,
we, you know, do this, then like all this trickle down effect is going to happen. But then I'm like, so what? Like,
yeah,
why is that a problem? I think I'm like in such an era right now where I'm just like, let's just throw it all out. I tell my students and literally every day that I show up to class, I'm like, everything is fake. Like,
yeah,
we're gonna make it up. And so, let's just kind of, and I think there's maybe just a fear of like, oh, well, if we think of things that way and we just like make up our new rules or new systems, like everything's just going to crumble. And so I think because of a lot of that fear, like we're not kind of making strides or think like history is repeating itself.
mm.
Um, I know because I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think
Fear?
it's so
No.
interesting. I mean, the Met Gala just happened. I know this episode's coming out a few weeks later, but the Met Gala just happened, and the exhibition that they were raising money to fund has so many types of bodies in it, and so
Mm,
many different types of people represented in the forms, in the costumes, in the exhibition. But then on the carpet we saw maybe a couple people who didn't fit that prescribed notion of what a beautiful body should look like, and
yep.
those people weren't shown on the carpet, they were shown in interviews, and that was about it.
Yep.
So it's we're so mired in this, we're stuck, our boots are stuck in the swamp of
Hmm.
conformity. And
Yep.
it makes me so mad because you see so many different types of people being able to contribute so many things that we wouldn't have thought of if they
Mm,
weren't contributing. And I mean, of course, I'm I am white. I am male passing. I am all of these things. So I personally benefit from a lot of things that this world affords
mhm,
me.
mhm,
But at the same time, being queer, you start to kind of see those cracks a little bit more readily, and you're able to peek around the edge of the curtain and say and
yeah,
see
yeah.
what things could be if we listened to people and allowed people to be themselves.
Right.
And I think that's something that, as I was reading the articles that you sent, that really kind of hit me and made me
Mm.
frustrated for our world is there are so many kinds of people who
Hmm.
all have so many experiences that could translate to other people and we could learn from,
Hmm.
but instead we're not allowing them the tools to do that and to
Yeah.
contribute.
Yeah. No, gosh, this is I would love to know the answer, like why we constantly push back on that. Like, I mean, yes, our culture and society here is based upon the white, able-bodied man. And so like if you're not fitting that mold, it's like, oh well, no, we can't do that. Or like, no, you can't be on live television or be at prime time. We can't show these things. I'm like, why? Like, why? And so I think because of that, we've created kind of such a hesitance to like, oh well, we're not gonna do that because it's going to dismantle everything that like we know and like love. But I'm like, why is that what we know? And like it just doesn't, I don't know. I don't know. That's my
Shouting
answer.
into the wind, as it were.
Seriously, yes, yes. And I mean I do think at least just like with kind of in education that there is seems to be more of a push now than I have noticed in the past to like push that conformity. Um, I still feel like there are people that are hesitant to do it because they're like, oh, well, this is not the way that it's always been done. Okay, well, maybe things need to be different. Um, and so like that's kind of a barrier there. But like I do see kind of there are strides, but I mean, yeah, I don't know. Gosh, you stumped me
Well,
on
and
that one, on this one.
so something also that I thought of earlier was when we're talking about the classroom and how it's set up and how it's all about like the very structured, the memorization, the regurgitation, and how that doesn't work for a lot of people with disabilities. And then how it also, because of how humans work, it also doesn't work for a lot of people who don't have those registered disabilities. It makes me think about just how disadvantaged it leaves the general student because of, take algebra for instance. Algebra is a non, it's a abstract math, and
Mm,
the number of students who leave high school saying, oh, I hate math, it makes no sense, what even is algebra,
mm,
tells me that we are expecting these students to look at something abstract and take
mm,
something regimented from it. And that's not
mm,
possible. So the
mm,
systems that we've set up that we're having to make accommodations
mm,
for disability students with disabilities is also hurting everyone else. Like I was saying earlier, that when you start allowing for the subjugation of the least of us, as it were, not saying that people with disabilities are the least of us, but using
mm,
common parlance that Christians would understand. But if you start saying, okay, you can take this group of people and subjugate them, it's going to start hurting everyone in
mm,
the most basic ways.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, and I think that the disability conversation, I think is also very, I mean, because it's such a, there's so many different types of like what it means to be disabled or what have you. But I think what we, if we could all kind of come back to this collective of like, let's be honest, all of us will be disabled at some point in our life,
Yeah.
and all of us are one step away from being disabled. And so, like, it is really at the end of the day a collective experience that we do have. Again, very different than like acquired
Mm-hmm.
versus, born with and what have you. But like maybe if we start shifting that mindset for people who aren't disabled, then they'll jump more on board with like, yeah, these accommodations or this individualization that needs to be had or what have you. And I mean, that's what I always kind of mention to my students as well. Um, but we just don't, I know, again, I think it's this fear of like, yeah, why aren't we accommodating everybody? Like, why? It just doesn't, none of it makes sense to me.
And also the number of students who leave high school in the US who are like, I don't know how to balance a bank account. I don't know how
Yeah.
to do my laundry. I don't know how to cook a
Right,
meal. Like
right,
everyone needs to know these things.
right, right, exactly. And it's not, we don't go to
We can't
school and
expect
then
they're getting it at home either.
right, exactly. And like we can't have this like expectation of like this is what, you know, it means to live and to work and like, you know, especially this is something I have a lot of conversations with people about with, because my research is more on the career development side of things, but I feel like career development for general everybody, the way that our society is set up is like, okay, you make money to live, to buy the house, to do these things. Like that is why you work. And I think that's a very like Western kind of way of looking at it. But especially for those with disabilities where there is a cap on, not for everybody, but like if you're receiving disability social security, like in many states, there's a cap of like how much you can make in addition to that. And so work then no longer is like just for the purpose of like, oh, I need to make money, I need to like buy the house, I need to buy these like food and all of that stuff. But then it becomes like, oh, a sense of purpose and social connection and all of that stuff. And I'm like, we need to, it's all these like kind of systems that we've built and we're like, oh, well, that is what work means. I'm like, well, why? Why does that have to be the way that we always have done it? And it might look different for you than it does for me. And like, that's okay. That shouldn't be an
Hmm.
attack on your experience. And like, I mean, we're not hindering you at all. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
It's not a pie that when you take a piece out, there's one piece missing. It's a pie that you take a piece out and it's still whole.
Right, right. Yeah. And like, we all should, be supporting ourselves and being a community and like wouldn't you want that? And I think it's just a lack of awareness and education and a lot of fear mongering that is happening, that is impeding from these things from really truly being like, okay, we really can have an inclusive society, but like we're
Hmm.
just being, and especially nowadays in this day and age, you can jump online and experience anything and
Yeah.
what is real anymore. And so I think it's, this is making me think of I taught a grad class in the fall and we were talking about like research dissemination and it also during this time the all of the discourse about like, oh, Tylenol causes autism and all of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But it was a very interesting conversation that I had with my
Hmm.
doc students because we were talking about like, okay, why is your research or like our research not being publicized so much? Like, why is it not being latched on by the general public? And like, why aren't we using it in educational systems or whatever? And then all of a sudden, someone says Tylenol causes autism, and it's like on every single news outlet, and everyone believes it. And it's because like people react so much to fear, or like to like really is these systems that are oppressing people are so good at bringing people into their fold. And so it was an interesting conversation because I was like, how can we learn from what they're doing, but to do it in a better way, to be like, oh, okay,
Mm.
actually, we should be, sharing all of this information.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. There is such a, whether it's fear mongering or people are always latching. I think it's also too we keep seeing disability as something that needs to be fixed and something that
Hmm.
is bad.
It's a
And
feeling of
then,
control. If Tylenol causes autism, then we
right,
can control it and we can just not take Tylenol and all of a sudden autism's gone. And that's just
right,
not how it works.
right,
It's just
exactly,
we want
exactly.
to
And
be able to control the scary things.
yep, and I think we're just still in this society, I think getting better, but we're still in this of like, how can we stop
Mhm.
these
I
disabilities from
mean
happening?
the gene recoding conversation has started up again, and it's just like every time it comes up, we have to say the same thing over and over. This is eugenics. This is eugenics. You keep trying to bring
Mhm.
us back to, oh, but you could eliminate this different thing that happens to a human if you just there wouldn't be blind people if we could just go in and deal with their DNA in the womb. And it's like that's not
Mhm. Right.
a goal. That doesn't need to be a goal. We can just include blind people in our lives.
Right. Right. Yeah, we could just be more accessible and yeah. Yeah, it is especially that too with like I think of, the blind and low vision and deaf and hard and hearing. I think those cultural kind of communities are like so I think we can learn a lot from because there
Mm,
is this push of like, oh no, we should be celebrating these differences in how we are, which when you move into like the learning disability or like intellectual disability space, there still is this like, oh, we have to fix, we have to
yeah.
like solve, um and we don't, like, let's
Yeah.
stop
Well, and I
that.
mean, you think about just taking that back to its very base essence of biology. There are animals that are blind and have been blind for millennia. There are
Mm,
animals that can't hear and haven't been able to hear for millennia. And that's part of how they work. And they work well like that. Humans
mm-hmm.
just have multiple different versions of us and we all
Mm-hmm.
work in different ways, and those ways are just as good as all of the other ways. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to have all five senses or whatever number of senses we actually have, because science hasn't caught up to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what we
Mm-hmm.
could discover in the next 10 to 3,000 years if we don't all go up in a blaze of glory. um but it's that seeing humans as a singular species with only one type rather than looking at every other species and seeing that there's huge amounts of variation in them, and we don't think that's wrong or bad or that we need to change that, except maybe with dogs where we breed them poorly and hurt them by doing that, or cats.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, yeah, it's, I think that's where we should take that thinking, is looking at the rest of nature and seeing, oh, there are 5,000 types of cedar trees out there, and yet we think there's only one type of human.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
there
no,
is
I
variation,
know.
and variation is beautiful.
Right, right. Yeah, no, the words right out of my head. But I think we're still so ever changing, but it's still kind of stuck on that. Oh, this is the way it has to be. This is the way you have to look, and this is what the epitome is that you should be chasing. Um, and that chasing is a huge detriment to so many people because it's causing, disability or not, so many complexes that people have, and like it's just not, we're causing more harm than doing good, but it's the people in those majority that if it's not affecting you, then it's like, okay, well, it's not my problem. And I'm like, no, it should be all of our problems because like we're all in this community together. We're all in this society together. We're all on this rock together. Like, can't we just do it together? Like, why do you, yeah, yeah.
So we've been a little down for the last probably 20 minutes or so. What is an improvement that you've seen in your field since you've been in it?
Yeah, I think the thing and like what I'm trying to adopt a lot more as well is this rediscovery of like what education means and like who we get educated from and like representation. And I think there's a lot more of a push of like, okay, we should be uplifting these lived experiences. We should be honoring these lived experiences. Like that is knowledge in its own, and knowledge isn't just held within, these four walls by these individuals. And so I do see a really big push towards that and to like practice more of that. So I do feel like things are, I mean, I think things are constantly changing. There's always going to be something that like, we hit a wall and we hit a barrier. And so I think that's been really cool to see, especially I think too, media and this like social media world that we're in, it is allowing for more representation and more voices that like I think historically that just have been silenced because they're able to, and now it's like less. And so I think all of those things are a very positive thing. And you know, as much as like all like there's some really bad things that are happening too, I think a lot of people are coming out and trying to like make like a change and like speaking out that maybe in the past haven't. And I think that's important. Um, yeah, so like even though I know we've been kind of down on the systems, it's I do see changes that are happening, slow and steady, and there's, huge barriers that are out there. Um, but I feel like we're almost on a cusp. I don't know what that cusp
Mm.
is, but
I mean, the phrase two steps forward, one step back, I
uh,
think people get hung up on the one step back a lot and forget that it includes two steps forward.
right.
So like there's always an ebb and flow to these things, but it's always progressing towards something. It's
Yeah.
always more and more people are included each time something happens.
Yeah, and I think especially in the education world, um, it's I think I also try to like have this realization that I'm like, okay, a lot of these changes 50 years ago, 40 years ago, it was drastically different. People were in institutions and what have you. And yes, I mean like should have this have happened a lot longer ago? Of course, but like I think it's also like we need to see these changes that are happening. Um, and we need to start especially in the fields that I'm in, which are largely people who are not disabled, the ones that are becoming the teachers and the therapists and the what have you. Like, we need to listen to these disabled people about their experiences so that we can do better and not be like, oh, well, I know best. And I
Yeah.
do kind of see that shift in that advocacy and in that kind of support, which I think is going to make positive changes. Plus whoever's in his office at the time.
Fingers crossed that
Well,
gets
that's
better.
another story. But I mean, it's I think that is also interesting too because again, I mean, looking at all the different kind of like minority groups and what have you, like disability, it really touches all aspects of life. I mean, a lot of things touch all aspects of life, but like really focusing on disability. And so, I've done things with organizations where you have gone on Capitol Hill to like talk to senators and what have you. And, there's always a family member that has a disability or, they do or what. So like it is at the end of the day too, like a bipartisan issue. And so I think that is a positive way of looking at it too, because it spans kind of so many areas. Um, yeah. So there is some hope at some point.
Well, on that question mark, let's let's switch gears and go into my synthesis questions. Dun, da,
Yeah.
da. So this is a series of questions that I ask all of my guests. Don't think too hard about them. Answer them as they come. So the first question is, what is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
Ooh, a typical rest day activity. It's a great question. I don't know the last time I had a rest day. Um, Gosh,
Good reminder to have them.
I know it is a good reminder. I feel like I use my like brain so much to make so many decisions or whatever. So like I just want to like shut it off, be probably reality TV, just like, lounging around and doing that. That like oddly, and I know it doesn't with everybody, but like Housewives, let's take it for instance.
Mm.
Like it's like calming to me when I see all this drama happening, which I think is probably another issue that I need to like probably go to therapy for. But I'm like that calms me. Where I
Mm.
know for other people it like creates more anxiety.
Oh, I couldn't do reality TV for a very long time. And then I sat down and watched Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and I was like, oh, I get it. I get why people watch this now. It
Yep.
was it
Yep.
was nice to just turn my brain off and let people be stupid.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. I was like, let me see other people's lives and what they're going
Yeah.
through.
What is your favorite setting for working on your research?
Ooh. I would say the community. I think a lot of education, not a lot, but like typical education researcher in the past has been very like contrived or clinical of like, oh, doing a single case study, we have to control all of these variables, or these are the best practices based upon this environment. But like the real reality is like those classrooms are messy, like life is messy. And so I think a lot of my work I like to do in the community with that messiness. And it's not like super pretty, but I'm like, that is what is real life though. Like if I'm going into a classroom and I'm like, hey, here this cool intervention that like does has shown to work, and like you're realizing that it's not working because of all these reasons, like, oh, okay, great. Let's report on that versus saying, yeah, when I did this intervention with a kid in a room, just me and the kid by themselves with nothing else distracting, like that's just not,
Yeah.
we can't contrive that again. So I think I would say my favorite setting is actually going into the community to make sure that it's useful also. Because if it's not useful, why am I doing it?
Yeah. What is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And this could be good or bad.
Ooh, I got to think about that one for a second. Huh. That
That
is
could be
such a
the answer
tough.
in and of itself.
I know. That is a really, really, really tough one. Um, can we come back to that one? I gotta think in the back of my
Sure.
brain. Gosh, that's hard. I don't know.
If you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
Ooh, 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 ooh. Huh. Gosh, these are stumpers. I don't know. I don't know if I've really like thought about it. I think lately I'm feeling this like weird sense of like, again, kind of going back to like I don't have a disability, so like a lot of the research and the work that I'm doing, it like I feel icky at times because I'm like, oh, I'm designing these things or like kind of learning this information about people with disabilities, but like I'm not someone that has that lived experience. And so I think if I was to go back and like do something different, I would do some more research and work based upon my own lived experiences. So maybe looking at like, yeah, that the queer experience or what have you. And I think some of my work has shifted a little bit to, you know, higher education and like how we, educate and train future professionals or what have you, which I think aligns better with like, oh, that is the setting that I'm in, and I can bring that lived experience. Um, but I don't know. I really love the work that I do, so I don't know if I would do anything different, if that's an
Nice.
answer.
Who is one other academic whose research you really admire?
Ooh, gosh, these are stumpy ones. Stump. So I have a friend who we like went through our PhD program together, and she really, I think, like has inspired me to relook at like our practices in special education of like doing
Mm,
research with people with disabilities, having them be co-researchers, having them be authors. Um, and I just loved kind of her fresh take on that of almost like pushing against um like, oh, we're in academia, we have to like churn out all these publications and do all these things because it does take a lot of time and work to like co-design a research with someone else who maybe not is in this world. But like that is the changes that are going to matter at the end of the day. And so I don't know, I've always admired her kind of thinking with that as like, yeah, it might be kind of that pushback of the system of like just because it's done that way doesn't mean that you have to do it. You really have to kind of look at like what is your morals and kind of ethic to it. Um, so I would say her. Oh gosh, I don't know. This is an interesting one because I was literally just asked by my college to like help make a video about like what like previous teacher of yours is like you most inspired for, and I didn't have an answer for that either because I don't think I like idolize a specific person or like way of
Mm,
work, but rather I'm just curious about like how these systems operate and what people's lived experiences are. And like I see that as like the knowledge and the expertise. And like, okay, how can I use my platform in place to like showcase that versus my own kind of thoughts and stuff. And so I think it's not even, yeah, it's like those are the people that I kind of like am inspired and admired for, if that makes sense.
hmm. What is a question you've never been able to answer?
All of these? No. Oh gosh, what is a question I've never been able to answer? I'm gonna kind of spin this one a little bit because I can't think of anything specific, but I think going through this like PhD academia journey, there's this like sense like, oh, we're teaching you to be experts in X, Y, and Z. And so I think I've been in spaces where like, oh, you have a PhD in special education, you're an expert on disability and all that stuff and what have you, answer all of these questions. And I'm trying to like stop myself from doing that because again of that lived experience of like, okay, I know the textbook and I know the
Mhm.
history of it, but like there are like a lot of those concepts of like what is independent, when you were asking me like why is independent living the goal of, graduating? And I'm like, that's a great question. It shouldn't be. Like we should be asking those people. And so I think I'm spinning your question a little bit of like I think the questions that are geared towards this population that I'm supporting that I don't really want to answer anymore because they should be asking those questions to them, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. And then the last question is what font do you wish you could present your research in?
Ooh, I'm a Times Roman all through and through. Very basic.
Wow.
I know, I very basic, which is like odd because I'm not basic in other areas of my life. I think I'd get decision fatigue with that. I've always thought of like, okay,
Mm,
what is the font? And I'm like, oh my God, there are too many choices. I can't do it. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna stick to what is the norm there.
that's
Um,
fair.
yeah.
And where can people find you online? How can they
Ooh,
support your work?
yes, 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 yes. So LinkedIn, even though I'm a horrible LinkedIn person, TikTok, obviously, I'm trying to be more academic-y in those spaces, and I have an Instagram as well, so I can share all of those for people to come follow and chat with me.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for being on the pod and for having this
yeah,
conversation. It was
yes,
amazing. And thank
it
you all
was. It
for
was so
listening.
fun.
We
No,
will
thank
talk
you.
to you all later. Bye.
Yep. Bye.
A huge thank you again to Dr. Price for joining me on the podcast. It was an incredible pleasure to have you as a guest and to get to have a conversation with you about these topics and think about things from new directions. So, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you to all of you listeners for joining the conversation. I really appreciate this opportunity that you are giving me to share the work of these incredible scholars with you. And I really hope that you can help spread the word so we can grow this community and make sure that this podcast gets to people who need to know these things that our nerdy little conversations could actually help someone out there. So thank you all for being here. If you would like to ask any questions of myself or my guests, please feel free. These questions can be about anything. They could be about academia, they could be about specific subjects. I can always hold on to questions until I have someone who is relevant to the question. They could be about life in general. If you would like to ask us any sort of question, please feel free. You can submit those to us on Instagram at hypothesispod, via email, podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. That's podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to hear your voice on the podcast, you can submit an audio question to us at speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. As always, you can find the articles discussed on the podcast on my Substack. That's iramcintosh.com slash iramcintosh.substack.com. Wow, I totally messed that up, but that's okay. Again, that's iramcintosh.substack.com. Please follow all of our socials. Like I said, the Instagram is at Hypothesis Pod. You can also find me on Instagram at Ira A. McIntosh. You can find us on TikTok at Hypothesis Pod. You can also find us on YouTube under The Gay Ethnographer. And that's where you'll find the videos of these podcasts. So if you like to watch podcasts or have us in the background, please feel free to do so. Those videos, like I said, are on our YouTube or they are on our Substack as well. So please make sure you follow all of those Substacks, all of I can't even talk anymore. Please follow all of our socials. And please subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends. Remember, when you listen to the podcast, please download each episode. That's what helps us see those numbers on the back end. And share with friends. The community can't grow if we aren't sharing with people we know and love and who we know would love the podcast. So please, let's fight misinformation together. Have a wonderful day and go read a book. Goodbye.